don't worry, may backup naman tayo on the sides. Now, in the previous episode, of course, we talked about the predicament of the Philippine left and their latest realignments and working with the traditional elite to push for their agenda. So, just to summarize, Ronaldo, no, yung argument mo is that you're saying there are structural limitations na dun sa armed struggle. So it's almost inevitable na they'll have to make the big choice. Whether they'll make that choice is something we'll discuss right now under Marcos Jr. But what you're saying is that advances in surveillance technology is going to make guerrilla warfare more difficult the way it has been conducted. You're saying that there has been a generational shift or generational attrition. And of course, we also saw because of the loss of many of their top leaders, you really have fragmentation within the system. Not to mention, I think Lelo has done a very good job of saying ideological also, hindi sila nag-update. Yung software siguro ay medyo iPhone 5 pa lang, medyo iPhone 15 na tayo ngayon, diba? So, putting all of those factors together, your argument is, it's almost inevitable that they'll make that choice. So, which brings me to Marcos Jr., right? So, this episode will be about Marcos Jr.'s potential legacy, both economic, which we'll discuss shortly. Pag-usapan natin si Elon Musk because he's about to meet Elon Musk this week on the sidelines of APEC. But let's finish muna on this point. So you're optimistic or cautiously optimistic that under Marcos Jr., baka mangyari yung dapat nangyari for a very long time, ending effectively the longest communist insurgency arguably anywhere in the world. Is that what you're foreseeing right now? And now that medyo may political alignment na yung parliamentary side also, with
naman ni BBM.
Close to BBM.
Well, bago nakalaya si Laila, no, halos yung Duterte forces are preparing themselves to be the new opposition, no, to be the new opposition. Pero they might not survive this interregnum going into the midterm, no. Una ay nakarma si Vice President Sara Duterte na wala yung kanyang hundreds of millions na pwede niyang gamitin sa machinery building, pwede niyang gamitin sa mga safe houses.
Alam ko 12 o'clock na, pero ingat tayo pare.
Safe houses, no? Pwede niyang gamitin sana sa mga safe houses.
Monitoring of insurgency in our universities. Ganyan. Kasi education, di ba, Ronald?
Yeah. Hindi ko sinasabing ginagamit niya yan sa mga headquarters, ha? Hindi ko sinasabi na ginagamit nila sa mga political.
Ronald, Secretary of Education yan. Inaalagaan lang niya ang kapakanan ng ating mga estudyante.
Para sa ROTC yan eh. Sabi ng tatay niya, ginagamit yung confidential fund para sa ROTC. Pero parang medyo malabo dahil wala namang ROTC sa high school tsaka sa elementary no? So hindi ko alam kung paano mamagicin yun.
Baka naman binigay sa check. Baka naman.
May refund
tapos
policy.
Ikalawa,
si
Arroyo totally tinanggal na as deputy speaker, no? Talagang tinanggal na as deputy speaker. Tapos ikatlo, itong last nail on the coffin. Ang tawag ko nung isang episode natin, the biggest nail on the coffin ay itong ICC. No, kung mangyari itong ICC, hindi na maipoposition nila Digong yung sarili nila as the new opposition, no? Tapos nangyari pa si Laila, no? Pwedeng yung hindi nagawa last year ni Lenny na i-harness yung pink wave through a nationwide Thanksgiving and listening tour. Pwede ngayong gawin niya ni Laila, no? In a different context. A nationwide Thanksgiving tour and listening tour together with Risa, to harness what remains of the pink wave, no? Para pagdating ng midterm, may kaunti kang tunay na opposition, not the Duterte opposition, no? Na hindi mangyayari kung hindi nakalaya si Laila. So yun yung
alam ko gabi na ayoko mapagod ka. I'll give you some rest time. Baka magkamali ka, delikado tayo diyan. No, Leloy, I think Ronald is essentially saying that it's almost inevitable that some on the far left will have to move to the center left. Do you see a possibility, Lele, or are you looking forward to, for that matter, of, let's say, more Risa and Franz Castro working, those types of people working together as part of a kind of a new mitochondria of a revived opposition, as Ronald has been talking about for
Ay,
so
alam mo yung isa pang possibility nito is split yung left. I mean, babalikan lang natin yung negotiations ni Ronald. Sa tingin ko kung naiuwi ni Ronald yung yung resolution noon, hindi lang bayani si Ronald, kundi he might have actually triggered another split in the left. Kasi sa tingin ko hindi lahat papanig kay Tatang eh. May mga hardliners na mananatili. So, ang mangyayari doon, meron kang left na papasok sa gobyerno or magiging kaalyado ng gobyerno. Pangalawa, meron kang sobrang hardliner na sobrang liit. Pero essentially, pag gano'n nakaliit, I think nung time nyo, parang weren't you using the words, Ronald, police action? Pag gano'n nakaliit, police action na lang yun, hindi na insurgency eh. So, baka ganun yung mangyari. And kung ma-split mo na ganun, maybe yung mga tao na, lumayo na from the armed struggle, sila ngayon yung baka maging mga katropa ni Risa sa Senado o sa Kongreso, ganyan. I would really like that. That would be nice.
do you see that pink and red coming together or something like that? Kind of
Kasi sa tingin ko, kaya ng split
yeah.
para mangyari yun do. Kailan ng split? Ako lang yun.
Well, hindi automatic, no? Dahil magkakaroon yan ng transition, gestation period, no? At trust building, no? Hindi yan kailangan ng panahon para mag-build ng trust eh. So hindi yan mangyayari overnight, no? Dahil marami na ring mga away, marami na ring dugo, marami na ring mga differences. Kaya hindi automatic halimbawa from a Maoist ideology biglang magiging social democratic or magiging liberal democratic.
Yun.
No? Immediately, hindi yan ganun kabilis, no? Hindi yan ganun kabilis, no? Others will be jogging in place, others will lie low, no? Baka nga mas marami yung mag-lie low eh, no? Dahil pagod na, dahil disillusioned, no, with their leadership, with their ideology, and a few might reinvent themselves into a different ideology. But I doubt kung yung majority ng pinag-uusapan natin ay gagawin yung ganyang klaseng political and ideological transition immediately. No? Tingin ko mas marami yung maglalaylo sa pagkakakilala ko dun sa mga iba, no? At yung iba will remain, no? Yung sinasabi nga ni Leloy na a small minority, no? Which can also be dangerous dahil you just need 100 suicide bombers to create havoc eh. No? So kung merong matitira sa iyo na a few hundreds, no? Very hardline, very fanatic, no? Pa rin yan, delikado pa rin yan. Pero I think most will lie low.
Dito rin siguro makita si Ronald dito natin makikita yung level ng ideological indoctrination. Kasi kung mababaw yung Maoismo, di madali rin magunaw. Pero kung talagang malalim at taon-taon mong inaral, siguro mahirap matibag yun ng basta-basta. Dito sa US, actually, nakikita ko na mababaw na yung ideological indoctrination. At least yung mga estudyante dito na fans ng Makabayan, hindi na nila naiintindihan yung poll spec ng Pilipinas. Ewan ko, sa Pilipinas siguro mas malalim pa. Pero for example, dito, pumunta si Risa, hinost namin si Risa dito, pinaligiran ng pinaligiran ng anak bayan. At hindi rin na-rally, hindi inaaway, humihingi ng autograph at ginayakap. Ewan ko kung gano'n sa Pilipinas.
That's what I'm saying. Maybe Riza Ontiveros is what it takes to bring pink and I don't know, red.
Pero sa tingin ko, agree. Sa tingin ko dahil mababaw na lang yung political indoctrination dito sa US, kaya nangyari yon. Kasi sa mga Amerikano, importante sa kanilang identification with the Philippines as opposed to identification with the political cause. Kaya
yung mga Maoist dyan, Leloy, na-infect na ng identity issues eh.
Yun nga, nakita nila si Risa, Pilipino, babae, progressive, di ba? Inakap nila. It's funny.
Identity politics can bring them together. So if there's a disagreement on political economy and revolutionary agenda, what can be?
Kasi kahit yung mga staff ni Risa gulat na gulat din eh. Bakit kami hinayakap dito nitong mga to? Ay, sininayakap talaga ha.
Mas ang strong point diyan, Leloy, is the organizing tactics eh. less about ideology. No?
Mm.
Ang hirap ipaliwanag sa mga Phil-Americans yung Maoist ideology as the cornerstone of their activism. No?
Pilipinas.
Pwedeng pasadahan, pwedeng banggitin, etc. Pwedeng hindi banatan. Pero yung organizing dyan, mas issue-based eh. Di ba? Mas issue-based. Yung dominant aspect ng organizing nila dyan.
Perfect. So it looks like not only there's a chance under Marcos Jr. matapos na yung longest running communist insurgency, but there's a chance that there'll be even a new revived opposition. So he might have a good legacy after all. By default, not doing
Richard,
anything.
one of the elephants in the room ay mai-improve ba ni Marcos yung economy? Di ba? Paano kung
Magaling ka talagang
magde-deteriorate yung
co-host
economy, no?
Exactly.
Kahit yung ideological foundations ng mga NPA, ng Communist Party ay baka tumagal pa ng kaunti yung kanilang demise, no? Dahil yung economy, hindi ko siya nakikita na mag-i-improve dramatically eh. Baka pa nga mag-deteriorate eh. If Marcos don't play his cards right, no? Halimbawa, yung sinasabi nilang every month kasi bumabiyahe si Marcos eh, 16 trips eh, no? Pero ang sabi niya 80 to 90 billion dollars yung MOU. Eh wala pa namang pumapasok ni 1 billion eh. No? Ngayon, bago na naman kanyan. Mga bagong commitments na naman yan, no? Et cetera. Pero walang pumapasok eh. Hindi lang naman yung Chinese 22 billion commitment ang hindi papasok eh. Na so far, pagamat may kaunting indication na posibleng mas may pumasok sa panahon ni BBM from the US and from Europe.
Negative yung net flow. Net inflow.
Negative
talaga.
Yeah. Kaya sinasabi ko kahit may ganung klaseng possibility dahil sinasabi kasi ng mga Amerikano at Europeans, magpa-pump prime kami next year, no, et cetera. Bagamat lumalabas 30% ng FDI ay lumabas, di ba? Hindi na nga pumapasok, may lumalabas pa, di ba? Yun yung sinasabi kong delikado. Kaya hindi necessarily na mawawala itong insurgency, hindi necessarily mawawala itong mga extremist opposition, no? Ganyan. Dahil yung economy, ano bang gagawin?
Ang dali rin kasing maging yung isa kasi yung outward expression ng economy looks good all the time. Hindi dahil magaling yung nasa Malacanang, kundi dahil yung circumstances, yung population natin at saka yung region natin, ASEAN is the fastest growing region in the world, and then we're the fastest growing ASEAN country. So kahit unggoy yung ilagay mo sa Malacanang, talagang lalago yung ekonomiya.
Kahit bakante nga, sabi ko kahit bakante pa.
Kahit bakante nga. So it can theoretically breed complacency, and then obviously laging nagkakaroon ng good news kung gano'n. Akala mo sobrang lakas ng Pilipinas dahil nag-grow yung economy, but at the same time bumaba yung inflation. At dahil bumaba yung inflation, mukhang the central bank will end yung period of rate hikes, which will further charge the GDP. So 2020, tapos magpapasko pa. So lalago ulit yung ekonomiya. So kung ganyan lang yung tinginan mo, dali maging complacent. Pero if you look at those particular circumstances, wala dun sa growth na yon is a product of internal reform. A lot of that is externally induced. So back mababa yung inflation, yung rate hike sa US hindi na kasing aggressive, so hindi na rin natin kailangan mababa na yung inflation sa US, bababa globally. Yung rate hikes sa US hindi na kasing aggressive, so hindi na rin natin kailangan maging kasing aggressive mag-rate hike, so mag-grow yung economy natin. And then at the same time, yung spending ng gobyerno na hindi nagawa dun sa first half, na ilabas na nila ngayon, kaya nag-grow yung economy. And then at the same time, hindi na rin mag-rate hike sa Pilipinas, magpapasko pa. So 2023, beginning of 2024 will look good. But very few of those circumstances were products of internal reform. Kaya sinasabi ko, ang daling maging complacent kung ikaw ang presidente ng Pilipinas ngayon.
Yeah, so very good point. Before I go to
malinaw na yung consumption ay hindi nag-i-increase, no? Private investment hindi nag-i-increase. At patuloy na yung Gini coefficient natin ay nasa ganun pa rin level, no? Walang
Although nag-improve under
walang masyadong
Digong.
difference, no?
I just want to stop there kasi very interesting argument natin. So what we're saying, Ronald, what we're saying, sa political front, there is a structural opportunity for Marcos Jr. to almost by default, no, oversee some major changes. Potentially the semi-evisceration of the communist insurgency that has bedeviled the country for quite some time. But of course, the roots of that goes to dictatorship, poverty, etc. Which brings us to the second point. With what Lelo is saying, you cannot also just structurally write high growth, low quality kind of economic development because that could backfire and eventually undermine the political opportunity for structural transformation. Kasi connected yan eh. Which brings me to this point, which is realistically, what can we really expect from Marcos Jr. beyond performative economics, right? Because his economics is just standard macroeconomic, prudential economics, and etong pledge commercial diplomacy, right? So the latest big time he's gonna meet is Elon Musk. So expect in the coming days, big pictures, BBM meeting Elon Musk, Elon Musk making promises of investment, Tesla, Philippines, blah, blah, blah. But ang mahal na electricity, ang pangit pa rin na infrastructure, right? On and on and on. Kontrolado pa rin ng mga oligarchs yung commanding heights of the economy. So, I mean, realistically, do you think that the same way that we have been surprised with some interesting political things, I know that we said he's conflict avoidant, but at the same time, some changes and shifts have happened. Don't you think at some point magigets ni BBM na hindi niya kaya gawin yung sinasabi lang ni Leloy na makikiride lang doon sa demographic momentum, makikiride lang dahil na ang hirap natin, ang baba ng per capita, growing 6% is really nothing magical. Do you think eventually, both of you guys, do you think at some point baka magising si BBM or sabihan siya ng mga advisor niya, sir, kailangan mo you need to leave something major behind. You need to get big investments in. You need to really get the utility sector, basic ingredients of economic development going. You need to have, as I always put it, some element of industrial policy, which is back in vogue nowadays.
Kahit wag na natin pag-usapan ng progressive economics. Pag-usapan na rin natin yung template ng gobyerno o at least ng dominant class sa panahong ito, no? Even within that framework, no, hindi maiiwasan ni BBM na ayusin yung comparative advantage ng bansa, no? Because yung inaasahan nila kasi investments sabi mo nga lumalabas pa nga no? More than 30%. So itong sinasabi ng kaibigan natin na si Dindo na mga investments na substantially papasok, hindi yan papasok hanggat yung comparative advantage mo, halimbawa sa electricity, ay ganyan pa rin, no? Diba? Yan yung kaya nga talagang kahit pinagmamalaki ni Jokno na tayo ay sabi niya fastest growing economy in the ASEAN region, no? Nalampasan na tayo ng Vietnam. At kung hindi magbabago yung ating comparative advantage, because perhaps in the next 5 years, malampasan tayo ng Cambodia. No? Kaya, yun ang kailangan ayusin ni BBM. No? Yung comparative advantage na yan, na isa lamang yung electricity at saka power. No? Isa pa rin yung corruption ay matindi pa rin no? Ang dami kong nababalitaan Halimbawa sa house, no? Ang dami kong nababalitaan.
Alam mo kay Maharlika mo nabalitaan ni mga cross.
Hindi. Mga listening post ko marami nagrereklamo no? So kailangan talagang mag-clamp down. Halimbawa, itong mga hoarders, itong mga smugglers na sabi ni BBM nung nakaraan niyang SONA, ipapakulong ko, etc. Sino nakulong? Wala akong alam ni isa na nakulong Pero yun yung sinabi niya sa SONA niya. Yun ang sinabi ni Speaker Romualdez, nag-grade pa siya, di ba? Pero biro mo nag-grade ka tapos wala nakulong. So on that second aspect, corruption, kailangan meron kang ipakita No, kailangan may ipakita
Yun
ka.
nga, Ronald, we agree on that. But do you think realistically, what can we expect under BBM? Hindi naman siya tanga. Nagigets naman niya may kailangan. And at some point, there are times na he showed a degree of political astuteness.
Tingin ko kailangan niyang palitan yung kalahati ng kanyang cabinet.
Good scenario here.
Tingin ko kailangan niyang palitan yung kalahati ng kanyang cabinet. No? DTI, DOTR, DOLE, no? Perhaps finance. no? Pero wag naman ipalit politician. Paano mukhang yung ipapalit politiko eh, no? Kay Jokno. Okay lang palitan si Jokno, no? Sana nga baka within their own framework baka pwede pa si Philip Medalla, no? Kumpara kay Jokno.
Pero
Kumpara
ayaw
kay
na ata.
Jokno.
Ayaw na
Kumpara kay
ata.
Jokno.
Hindi na siguro papayag yun.
Kaya nga. Pero kumpara kay Jokno, mas kabisado ni Philip yung kanyang numero, yung kanyang numbers, no? Si Jokno parang political na eh, no? hindi na siya kuwan eh. So, ibig sabihin, isang move dapat ni BBM to improve the government ay kuwan mag-revamp as well as change the narrative, no? Change the narrative sa ginagawa. Dahil yung kanyang approval rating bumababa rin eh. 'Di ba? 15%, that's huge. Hindi nangyari yan sa mga previous presidents. Yung ganyan na first year, 15% yung binaba mo. Kung magpapatuloy yan sa next survey, delikado siya. No? So hindi lang yung mga Duterte ang delikado, pati siya delikado. Buti na lang, walang strong opposition no? na magma-maximize yung ganong klaseng downtrend. No? Kaya, ayun,
Ikaw, Lele, what's your take?
sinabi niya
Yeah.
nung nasa a few months ago, sinabi niya magre-revamp siya. Pero wala nangyari. No?
Nagdala
Ang
siya ng
significant lang na ginawa
aquaculture
niya, naglagay siya
na aquaculture.
cabinet secretary sa agriculture na
Right.
mukhang hindi rin alam
Aquaculture.
no?
Hindi, eto Ronald, so maybe I'll ask also Lele about this kasi si Ronald kind of put aside the question of progressive agenda. I won't even say progressive, I would say standard industrial policy, investment strategy. Lele, your new book is kind of about the failure of the Philippines developmental state experience, something along those lines, right? Or shortcomings of macro-prudential, semi-new liberal and eventually new liberal economics, right? But obviously, hindi yan nag-work eh. Kasi the average Filipino's living standard is still not there. I mean, coming on middle class, I can sense it. Napag-iwanan talaga tayo ng ibang middle class in Vietnam and many other countries. So, don't you think we're reaching a point of essentially a critical juncture where talagang inflection point na kailangan talaga na the Philippines embraces something new? Otherwise, delikado to eh. Di ba? Or
si Jokno is
we're
a
just gonna
perfect
be
example.
complacent
Diba?
forever and bahala ng buhay.
Outside, ewan ko may nangyayari kasi sa kanila, pag pumapasok sila sa gobyerno, nagiging macro-prudential. Pag nasa labas ng gobyerno, ang lakas mag-propose ng industrial policy or the fundamental rethinking of the economic premises of the Philippines. So for example, si Jokno, kaawayan ng central bank noong 1990s. Noong panahon ni Ramos, tinawag nga yan ng central bank na jukebox economist. Jukebox meaning, maglalagay ka ng pera tapos kakantahin niya yung gusto mong kantahin. Ganyan kagalit ang central bank kay Diokno nung panahon na yun. Because in the 1990s, in order to avert the Asian financial crisis, Diokno along with Fabella, Calixto Chiquiamco, Noel de Dios, they proposed a strategic depreciation of the peso. Alam mo na ito, obsession ko, Richard, diba? The strategic depreciation of the peso. Ngayon, si Diokno na naging central bank governor, so he was placed in the position na parang ito na yung pantasya niya noong 1990s, diba? Strategically depreciate the peso. Hindi niya ginawa, diba? I mean, he was associated with this cause for like years. So bakit importanteng strategic depreciation of the currency? Because it is the ultimate, paulit-ulit na, it is the ultimate protectionist measure for your exporters, diba? It's the ultimate form of protectionism. Kaya nga yung mga nagde-depreciate ng peso, nagagalit ang US, tinatawag na currency manipulator. Ang Vietnam, tinatawag na currency manipulator right now. So I think there's something really about yung nature ng central bank na kapag pumasok ka, iba yung demands on you.
So Lele, what you're saying is that the bureaucracy,
banking class, I don't know.
right.
Pero yung central bank, I really think the central bank should be reformed. That's one thing. It's an institution that really should be reformed. Kasi kasi tingnan mo ang Indonesia actually nag-central bank reform yan. Kasi ang central bank ng Indonesia was until I think 2010 very much like our central bank, inflation targeting bank. Walang developmental goal. So single mandate central bank. Nag-reform na ang Indonesian Central Bank, dual mandate na yan. Parang US Fed may developmental goal na. Yung central bank natin, wala pa ring developmental goal. So what that means on paper is, given a choice between ultra low inflation, growth and employment, and developmental goals, the central bank will always choose the former, di ba?
Inflation.
Wala siyang balance. Ngayon yung mga ibang central bank, binabalansin nila yung goals ng development at goals ng low inflation. Yung central bank natin, walang ganyang klaseng goal. Kaya ang sabi nga ni governor, ng governor ng central bank, we are an inherently hawkish central bank. Kaya kita mo kung mag-slash ng rates ang central. Do you know, for example, the Philippines, itong last wave ng inflation, tayo yung pinaka-aggressive nagtaas ng interest rate sa buong Asia. Pinaka-aggressive. Ngayon, umaaray, mismong si RC Balisacan, umaaray na. Sinasabi niya, Gov, masakit na po, masakit na Gov. Walang pakialam si Governor because meron kang myth of central bank independence, which is it's actually bullshit, yung myth of central bank independence. Ano yung other institution na so-called independent sa Pilipinas? Is the Supreme Court, di ba? Appointed pero hindi mo na pwedeng tanggalin, tapos nominally independent. Pero lahat ng Pilipino, alam naman nila na bullshit ang Supreme Court independence, na bahagi ng politika. And yet when we think about the central bank,
Wala kaming sinabi.
And then when we think about the central bank, we can't apply the same kind of cynicism. Naniniwala tayo na talagang beyond politics yan. Ulul mo kung beyond politics yan. Central bank is part of the politics of the Philippines, and central bank has stakeholders, may accountability yan. And it's accountable to a particular banker class na ang gusto lang nila protect the value of their assets as opposed to grow the economy, right? So sa ako talaga, fundamental reorientation of central bank, and then Filipinos should actually, care about the central bank the way they care about the Supreme Court, which is not a lot, but they care about the Supreme Court more than they do the
Very
central
good point. Very good. Leloy, sorry, I want to push you on this because I want this to be the last part of our discussion. Again, this is what I find unique, no? So, ganito kasi, we always talk about oligarchs. We always talk about political dynasties and trapos as the menace to the Philippine democracy and political economy. But what I and Leloy have been emphasizing over the past year or so, since some of our kerfuffle with some of our friends there, is that you also have to look at the role of Filipino technocrats. And one thing interesting Leloy is saying here is that even yung mga progressive or matino mag-isip, once nandun na sila sa loob, there's just something with the bureaucracy, the financial banking bureaucracy in the Philippines, that makes them standard, quote-unquote, new liberal, macroprudential kind of technocrat. Ikaw, Ronald, you were the odd man out in the Aquino administration. And one of the criticism against the Aquino administration was, okay, maayos yung macroprudential, but there was nothing really significant in terms of industrial and trade policy, no? I mean, ganyan ba kalakas? Ito ba yung deep state talaga ng Philippines? Hindi yung mga trapoy. Ito ba talaga yung deep state? Leloy, I'll push it. Is the new liberal technocracy the deep state? And just to make it clear, yung sinasabi ni Leloy is, yung mga mayayaman sa Pilipinas who have a lot of savings, they have an interest na mababa yung inflation. Because if the inflation is higher than interest rate, they're losing a lot of money every year. So having a low inflation strategy is good for the richest people, but not necessarily always for the poorest.
Kasi yung tsaka isa pa, so sasabihin ko, yung ganyang klaseng anti-inflation is asset protection. Ang anti-inflation na hinaharap ng mga masa is reducing food inflation na madalas walang kinalaman sa interest rate, taripa, production processes. So ito yung canard ng central bank, sasabihin nila anti-inflation kami dahil gusto namin mahirap. Pero the interest rate na ginagamit nila is such a blunt tool for reducing the prices of the things that the poor really need, which is food. Gumagana siya in terms of protecting bond prices and asset prices na mayaman naman ang may pakialam. Kaya huwag niyo tayong lokohin na pro-poor yung anti-inflation agenda.
Kasi sinabi mo na yan, Leloy. Sana itatanong ko sa iyo kanina. Yung mga anti-inflation moves ba ng central bank in relation sa interest rates ay talaga bang nag-work sa food inflation, no? Dahil usapin niya ng productivity usapin niya hindi naman yan hindi naman yan demand side no?
Galing talaga ni Ronald, organic yan organic intellectual talaga.
Kaya ayun, sinagot na ni Leloy dun sa pero ayun nga eh. Paano, ang strong point naman kasi nung gobyerno ni Pinoy ay anti-corruption. Diba? Yun yung kanyang strong point. Yung economic paradigm ay hindi naman talaga na set eh, 'di ba? At ang hirap din gumawa ng economic paradigm na bago, no, in less than 6 years. Dahil yung 1 year mo is a learning curve at yung last year mo ay lame duck. So practically you have to implement a new economic paradigm in 4 years, no? And we don't have an ideological state, no? Kaya where do we start? No, yan yung magiging usapin natin
Pero
in the
Ronald,
future.
I'll push back against you, no? Because Biden, just 2 years into office, many economists and many journalists believe that he has actually introduced an industrial policy revolution in America. Now, of course, you can argue that there was the pandemic, there was the Donald Trump protectionism. But if you really studied, and I actually, I forwarded by Furuhar, this very good article about end of neoliberalism in America since Biden came to power, no? Sobrang laki nung contribution to infrastructure development, building high-tech industry. So in 2 years, Biden was able to make that transformation. And I'll go even more historically. Look at the contribution of Abraham Lincoln. In barely 3 or 4 years, he transformed America's history, and by even human history, right? So I get what you're saying, Ronald. So is your argument, Ronald, is that the Philippine state is just so weak that 4 years is not the same as 4 years in America? Including 19th century America? I mean, I get your point, Ronald. Pero ang point ko is, pwede maging excuse yan. Ay, sorry, kulang lang 4 years. But, I can give you many examples of massive transformation in 2 or 3 years of presidency in other
Yes, pero
comparable.
the US state is not like our state, no? It's kahit papaano naman the US state has an ideological moorings yan eh, no? Kumpara sa atin, no? Yung sa atin talaga nagbabago yan every 6 years eh, di ba? So yun yung isang kaibahan na pwedeng magkaroon ng ganyang klaseng Biden economics, no? Within the nature of the US state. Sa Pilipinas, how much can you change, no? How much can you change? Dahil ang daming mga fundamental na kailangan mong baguhin eh, no? Halimbawa, napag-usapan namin ni Pinoy yung mga cartels, no? At medyo inclined siya na durugin yung mga yan, no? Pero may rule of law eh. Sabi ko nga sa kanya, boss, huwag mo napansinin yung rule of law. Hindi natin madudurog yung mga cartels na yan kung puro rule of law tayo. No? Kakampi ko pa nga si Senator Magsaysay eh. Nung kinakausap namin si Pinoy tungkol dyan. No? Dahil gusto niyang, gusto niyang simulan ng katayin yung cartel eh.
Medyo
Pero,
magdigong na siya.
hamstrung siya ng hamstrung siya ng judiciary, which is not the most just in the region, no, as well, no. So nung nagkakwan tayo, nag-session tayo sa yung first session natin sa Real, di ba?
Yes.
Ang tanong mo sa akin, gusto mo maging digong? Tama pala si digong, no? Ganun, di ba?
Di ba, yun yung real talk mo, di ba? May TikTok video tayo about that. I can share it. Maganda yung TikTok video na could you be a good dictator to shake up the system, no? In terms of, ikaw, Leloy, realistically, short of going, hindi naman, of course, Digong was really fake anti-oligarch because he had his own Duterte-garchs, but short of a dictatorship route, no? What can we do here? Kasi Leloy, I think we're doing the first step, which is exposing the very negative impact of the technocratic class in the Philippines, who essentially have served the interests of the capitalist, the bourgeois class here.
Siguro, dagdag din dyan,
Yes.
Richard, no? Leloy, meron ba tayo kahit maliit na modernizing elite? Or at least man lang
Good point.
a section of that? Dahil kung wala kasi yan, talagang socialism should be the agenda. Kung wala man lang na modern...
Papunta na tayo sa exciting part.
Alam mo, ang sagot ko dyan parang manipis, di ba? Pero naalala niyo yung tumakbo si Gibo? Meron talagang small segment ng mga liberal, even some socialists saying na parang he's so reminiscent of an old kind of modernizing elite sa Pilipinas, yung kind of 1950s bureaucrat na maalam, malalim mag-isip, ganyan, very technocratic. And siguro parang Mahathir, maybe can quote some philosophers, kagaya na nabanggit natin. Mahathir, Anwar, pareho tayo, Ronald. Confused natin si Anwar at si Mahathir.
Matalino rin si Mahathir. Matalino rin si
I wonder what that says. Ako yung favorite ko dyan, of course, si Salvador Araneta. Matagal ko nang sinasabi sa mga listeners natin na dapat talaga tignan yung early, he called it Christian democracy, pero actually, kung babasahin ngayon, makikita natin talaga na social democracy yung pinopromote niya at elite siya. And actually, one of the reasons why hindi pinapakinggan si Salvador Araneta ay dahil inilit tag siya or inilit bait. Sinabi dahil close siya to sugar interests na he can't care about the country as a whole. And so tainted forever yung legacy niya ng connection siya with the sugar industry. Hindi natin siniseryoso yung kanyang mga ideas, which were, kasi yung peso depreciation, for example, one of the reasons bakit ayaw yan nakaliwa. Kasi naging agenda yan ni Nasikat, naging agenda yan ni Virata. So it became coded as right-wing. Pero actually, the first proponent of strategic peso depreciation was Salvador Araneta, who squarely placed himself on the left and was actually exiled by Ferdinand Marcos. In fact, sabi niya, salamat Ferdinand Marcos at din-appreciate mo yung peso, pero number one, it's too late. Number two, you don't need to be a dictator to do that. So may ganyan talagang tradition, yung kind of Araneta tradition, strategic peso depreciation, export protection, and we call it full employment, Christian social democracy, na pwedeng buhayin. And alam ko there's a lot of interest now. Malapit nang buksan ang full archive ni Salvador Araneta. Nag-hire na sila finally ng archivist. And actually, I feel like a lot of our elites should read the story of si Don Badong, who's I think the great understudied elite modernizer of the 20th century.
So your argument, Lelo, is there could be kind of a noble oblige or conservative, socially, politically, but economically progressive, which is essentially the story of all our neighbors, right? Whether this is Kuan Yu, whether this is the Japanese LDP party, whether this is Kuomintang in Taiwan, they were all socially, politically conservative who had developmental economic policy, right?
Katoliko sarado si Don Badong eh. Oh, yes.
Pero ngayon ba may nakikita kang ganon? No? Ako wala akong makita.
We thought Maroas is that guy, right? I mean, some thought Maroas could be that guy, kind of a noble oblige, one of the elite, but at least naisip niya, blah, blah, blah. Pero wala na, naging masyadong politiko na eh. If ever
Actually, naisip ko lang, sobrang relevant yun ni Don Badong because the only cabinet portfolio he ever held was Secretary of Agriculture, which might be the most important cabinet portfolio today. So dapat talaga pag-isipan ulit yung kanyang legacy. I don't know. What do you guys think of Gibo Teodoro?
That's a very good point, bro. Let's end on Gibo na lang. We wanted to end on Marcos Jr. He became irrelevant suddenly. Ikaw, Ronald, kasi si Gibo, obviously may planong magpresidente ulit. I mean,
yes, he has ambitions.
Telling me inside.
Kaya hindi sila ganun ka-close ni Speaker. They look at each other as potential rivals. No? Ang problema, both of them ay medyo mababa sa polls, no? Yung dalawa na yan, no?
But that could be fixed, diba? If Sara is marginalized and Rafi Tulfo is convinced not to run for the presidency but settle for VP, pwede, diba?
Tulfo will run.
Yeah, but eventually Tulfo may be convinced to run as VP, no? Or you think he's gonna go for gold na?
For now, I think he will go for the
gold, no?
Yeah. Dun sa
masyado siya mataas sa survey.
Masyado mataas lalo if Sara goes down, no?
Parang parang magiging parang graceful yung parang ako yung mataas sa survey, bakit ako yung magse-slide down? Parang may ganyang sense ata mangyayari kay Rafi Tulfo, no?
Si Isko rin dati at some point.
Pero
I like that.
Pero balik tayo, ano tingin nyo kay Gibo? I mean, may modernizing impulse ba si Gibo?
That's a very... Ron, I want to start with you. Kayo muna, kasi actually, napaisip ako. Thank you, Lelo, that came out of nowhere, Hindi ko na-expect na we'll end on Gibo in our...
Kasi babalikan ko si Frankie Sionil Jose. Yun yung isa sa mga huling sinabi niya sa akin. I was around during the period of our great modernizing elites, 1950s, 1960s. Tapos sabi niya sa akin, this Teodoro reminds me of these people. Yun yung sabi ni Frankie sa akin.
Well, siyempre, at least nakalaya na siya doon sa taint ni GMA. No? Parang isa yon sa naging millstone niya nung tumakbo siya. Diba? One of the most corrupt presidents ang kanyang backer at saka endorser. No? Kaya medyo nasira siya ron. Maliban pa dun sa kanyang handling nung isang typhoon na typhoon lang pala, hindi niya kayang ayusin. No? So yon. Pero yung dati kasing strength ni Gibo ay yung kanyang relationship with Danding, no? na nag-unravel din. Kaya hindi ko alam kung sino pa yung iba niyang supporter at this point, no? Para siyang Lone Ranger, no? Kaya pag sinabi ko na a section of the elites, then I'm talking about a section of the elites, not an individual elite. No? Yun yung sinasabi ko na may pagka-modernizing na for now hindi ko nakikita. No, kahit yung mga Ayala pinapackage yung sarili nila as modernizing, they're just as trend-seeking as all the other Taipans.
And also Aboitiz.
Kaya wala akong nakikita at this point. No?
Also Aboitiz.
Tsaka yung elites din natin hindi nagsusugal para i-grow yung economy in new direction sa conservative din, you know. Kahit yung pagpapayaman nila, napaka-conservative ng pagpapayaman nila. Pwede ka naman magpayaman na may konting riesgo na parang talaga mag-grow yung ekonomiya. Yung
walang VinFast.
Upward-looking talaga para dumami talaga yung trabaho dito at dumami talaga yung foreign exchange. Hindi sila gano'n.
Yes. Halimbawa, yung Aboitiz, masarap kausap yung mga yan, no? Yung mga magkakapatid. Pero grabe ang regulatory capture nila. Talagang sila ngayon ang icon ng regulatory capture, lalo na sa energy, no? At pumapasok pa sila sa iba. Kaya wala akong makita eh. No? Gibo is an elite individual, but not a section of the elites. Yun yung magiging panja.
What about si Martin? I mean, he's quite smart. I heard good things about him when he was in Cornell back in the day. Matalino, maayos mag-isip. I mean, obviously,
yung anak niya nandun din daw ulit. Nasa Cornell din.
That was my Harvard Tagalog program daw na ano, di ba? So, I don't know. Maybe he's the guy.
Hopefully, pero...
Ronald, tumawa ka lang Tumawa
ka lang. Hindi, yung mga nakapaligid...
Plano ka sa Congress
Yung mga nakapaligid kasi sa kanya, leaves much to be desired. No? So, tell me who your friends are or who your political allies are and I'll tell you who you are. So baka kinakailangan niyang ayusin yon. Dahil sa ngayon, yung head ng kanyang APRO, si Saldico, di ba? So, yung kanyang so yun yung magiging problema ni Martin. Hindi siya makaalis dun sa kanyang not only class, no, kundi yung kanyang circle of rent-seeking and not too clean politicians.
So in that sense, Gibo is a bit more removed, more of a sovereign mind, more of a potential curveball in a good way.
Yes, but
ever, of course, he makes it to the
for now, he's an individual.
Interesting.
Not a political party, not a group, or not even a section of the elites.
Interesting. Very interesting. Ikaw, Leloy, last point to close this third episode of our makasaysayan RFL. This is good. I like it. Actually, ang dami ko naisip bigla. I'm gonna write it down. I really appreciated this. No, I really didn't see Gibo. I mean, but you're absolutely right, Leloy. This is like your guy. Your guy from the 1950s. Very interesting.
Ewan ko, tinatanong ko lang, wala akong exposure kay Gibo. Ang marami lang fans niya, including yung tsuhin ko na predecessor ni Ronald na ganun din ang sinasabi about him. Pero yeah, I don't know. Kaya ako nagtatanong, wala ako ganung alam tungkol kay Gibo. Alam ko as a debater, sobrang he's one of the most impressive debaters I've ever seen as a politician. Pero yun lang alam ko.
And ikaw, Ronald, last points to close this episode. Let's remember this episode was supposed to be about Marcos Jr. Is Marcos Jr. the precursor to
balik na lang tayo dyan.
Version of Noble Oblige?
Again?
Do you think that the Marcos Jr. administration, marginalizing Duterte's, bringing some sanity to our politics, this could at least create the breathing space for a revitalized opposition. Essentially, like not by intention, but by byproduct of Marcos Jr. style of approach. Baka naman medyo maayos-ayos ang lalabas. Gibo will rise, Riza will rise, I don't know, the left, far left will go to the center. I mean, you never know, right? I mean, ikaw, Ronald, if there's going to be some positive take on Marcos Jr.'s legacy, which was this episode, right?
Well, yes and no, no? Yes, dahil yung inaasahan na negative about him hindi nangyari, no? Which is uh, a repeat of the father, no? Mukhang hindi na mangyayari yan, no? Ang problema nga ay yung iba sinasabi, sana mas naging katulad siya ng father, who is very decisive, no, very strong, no, etc. No, yung sinasabi na sana may kaunti siyang ganon, no, to resolve itong mga ganitong klaseng mga away, mga problema. No? Again, katulad ng sinabi ko kanina, no, ang biggest weakness niya is hindi ganun kaklaro anong gagawin niya sa economy. No, walang at sa ngayon wala man lang kaunting indicative framework, no? Maliban sa Maharlika na hanggang ngayon hindi ko maunawaan bakit pinipilit. Diba? Itong Maharlika na ito, no?
Kasi wala nang iba eh. I mean, what else? You're right eh. Because Digong in his first 6 months, alam natin what he wants to happen. We didn't agree with him. But you know what? With Pinoy, first years too, alam natin anong mangyari kay Pinoy, di ba? He wanted to. So, but with 2 years na ito, hindi ko pa rin alam eh. Ano ba talaga to? So, is it just clean up?
Exactly.
Years? Oh.
Exactly, no? Pero, ayun nga, ang strength naman ito, meron kang political space eh. Lalo na pag natabi itong mga reactionary Duterte, maitabi yan, di ba? At ganito ka-positive yung kanyang foreign policy, no? Ganito ka-positive yung kanyang at least compared to his predecessor, yung respect for civil liberties, no, and human rights, no? Bagaman meron pa ring mga nangyayari, masyadong malaki yung difference from the tokhang moment ni Digong, no? So, yan. Pero the elephant in the room is the economy, no? Hindi ko nakikita kung anong plano niya eh, no? Maliban doon sa pinagmamalaki niya itong $90 billion in MOU sa kanyang 16 trips abroad.
Wala, hindi na bebenta yan eh. Nagawa ni Digong yan eh. That's wala na, laos na yung ganyan na pledge diplomacy. Thank you so much, Ron.
Pero babalik tayo kay Marcos. Sana man lang on the economy, wag mag-regress from Duterte. Kasi say what you will about Duterte, sabi ni Charmaine Ramos, gumawa siya ng pag-aaral, na si Duterte had the highest levels of social spending as compared to any other post-EDSA president. Ngayon, susukatin si BBM, dapat sukatin si BBM dyan. Gano'ng kataas ba yung social spending mo as a percentage of your budget? Hindi ko pa alam yung sagot kasi siguro ba too early on to see pa yung overall projection ng spending arc nila. Pero sana, kung hindi man mag-improve, wag man lang sana mag-retrogress. Kasi kung smaller ang social spending mo kay Duterte, edi you're no worse than you're worse pa than the mass murderer on the economy. So that would be really
Pero ang problema Leloy ni BBM, no? Halos bankrupt yung minana niya.
Exactly. Magagawa ni Digong dahil kay Pinoy. Ang dami na save ni Pinoy eh.
Kay Digong, nag-iwan kami almost at
exactly.
savings.
Thanks to Aquino.
And a good economy, no, to say the least, no, nung pumunta siya. Ito si BBM, medyo hirap siya. No? So pero wala siyang pang-ayuda. Si Digong ang daming pang-ayuda eh. Ang dami niyang pwedeng gamitin sa social spending. Maliban pa sa record high debts. No? Yun yung point.
Ito lang okay pa naman ang credit rating natin. Ang room natin para sa utang decente pa. Hindi pa naman ganun kasama. Pangalawa, sa tingin ko, globally, naniniwala pa rin ang mga tao na dapat bigyan ng konting puwang ang third world countries to spend after the COVID pandemic. Ngayon nga, actually, I was supposed to attend, kaso nag-overtime tayo. I was supposed to attend, may talk ang finance minister ng Indonesia sa amin ngayon.
Sorry bro, sorry pare.
Okay lang, papanurin ko dapat. Pero sabi niya talaga, ang sabi ng direction talaga, ang theme ng talk niya is called fiscal policy over monetary policy for the third world. So
Very good.
naniniwala
Very good.
siya na wala nang room for monetary policy, na maliit ang room for monetary policy for the third world ngayon. Dapat talaga ang pang-jumpstart natin ng mga ekonomiya ay fiscal policy. And so parang indicative to of yung mood sa Southeast Asia. Kung gano'n na mag-isip ang finance minister ng Indonesia, na pwede pa ring sakyan ni Bongbong. Pwede siyang sabihin na natin bumaba ng konti compared to Duterte. Wag lang sobrang mag-collapse yung fiscal
But
picture.
Lelo, I don't think he can even afford that with food inflation already dipping into his popularity, bringing down conditional cash transfers and other kind of measures.
Hindi nga, sabihin lang
I don't
natin,
think he can even afford it politically. Yeah.
sabihin natin bumagsak ng konti. Wag lang mag-crater. And I'd like our economists siguro to start studying na yung spending patterns ngayon pa lang. At saka yung importante diyan yung balance. Say bumaba yung pie, percentage naman spent on social spending ang pinag-uusapan natin, 'di ba? Dapat tumataas yung porsyento na napupunta sa social services kahit bumaba yung overall pie.
Leloy, even recognizing yung mga positive elements na nabanggit mo, yung isang element naman ng ating global economy ngayon, it's very competitive lalo na sa ating region, no? Halimbawa, in the past few decades, yung ating OFW are very dominant no, in the labor market. Itong next decade, with our deteriorating educational system,
Manganganib,
at yung scaling up ng ibang mga ka-level natin, no, sa third world, no, they will give us a run for our money, no. Example lang 'yon,
Kakatakot.
Itong OFW.
Saka yung call center natin kakainin ng AI.
Yan, no. Yan yung ating one of our few strengths, no.
We had a whole episode on that. Oo. Kaya nga,
Yeah.
that's my point, Ronald. My best wish is all we're seeing right now is a war of position that will place Bongbong Marcos eventually in the position to make the big decisions. Because mahirap mag-big decision kung the Dutertes are breathing down your neck. Mahirap mag-position kung hindi pa klaro saan yung foreign policy natin, sinong aliado natin. So, ito yung optimistic scenario. I'm not saying it's likely, but the optimistic scenario is that the first 2 to 3 years of BBM is cleaning up the house, and then he's gonna use his legacy years for big moves that could surprise us. That's the cautiously optimistic one. Whether it's gonna happen, I don't know. But at least we discuss possibilities of, even if hindi yung left or kaliwa or a populist takes over, if a bunch of more modernizing elite within the BBM posh people, figure out that hindi na sustainable itong status quo, maybe they'll do not 10 out of 10, but siguro 4 out of 10 some interesting moves on industrial and trade policy, etc. So that's how I read it, Ronald. Or that's also how I hope it will end up, because the alternative is kick the can down the road, muddling through, and in 5 years from now, kakainin tayo ng mga kapitbahay natin, kakainin tayo ng artificial intelligence, at kakainin tayo ng all sorts of internal problems na hindi na-resolve. And nakakatakot yung ganyan scenario. So I rather nudge the administration, because I know there's some people, including bourgeois Wall Street people, listening to us sometimes. You never know, Ronald. I hope they're listening to us, because our analysis is hindi sustainable in status quo. It's time to make some big moves. So I'm just hoping war of position pa rin tayo. Then we go to the war of maneuver, very Gramsci, by 2024 or 2025.
Yeah.
That's how I put it. Yeah.
Ang problema nitong 1.5 years ni BBM, no? Usually, he makes decision by not making a decision. No? So, yun yung nangyayari. Kaya kailangan magbago yun. No?
Medyo by default. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Nagka-crash na lahat ng phones ko, lobat na lahat. Sorry, Lel. Ang tagal natin nag-usap. This 2.5 hours almost. Wow. I mean, it just shows.
Okay, I prefer you guys to the finance minister of Indonesia.
Lelo, don't worry, you won't regret it. But you can get but I look forward to seeing the outline, because thanks to you, because for a long time, the Berkeley boys, new liberal Berkeley boys dictated Indonesia's economic policy, the whole
At saka saan makakabili ng libro ni Leloy? Hindi ko nga alam na may libro sa Leloy.
Send mo na yung pa-review mo na kay Ronald.
Napalala ko sa inyo, hindi pa lumalabas. Pinapadala ko kay
Okay.
Richard.
Pero
Humingi-
Ronald, basahin mo yung kay Araneta, di ba? Yung chapter.
Yeah.
Nabasa mo, di ba? Ang galing.
Yeah.
I really
Yun yung,
appreciate it.
yun yung isang takeaway ko dito sa ating session.
Galing. Ang
Yeah.
galing. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. I think the first RRL series of episodes, alam niyo man, chinop-chop natin para Ilocano style. Squeeze out. The responses were super good. Ang gagaling pa nga mga nagko-comment dito eh. Talagang kung ano ng tanong-tanong mga economic, etc. So that means we are engaging people even if it's 2 a.m. almost in the Philippines. So Sir Ronald, thank you so much. Pagod ka. Mas madaldal ka pa sa akin. So I imagine, grabe.
Hindi masyado ito, right? Hindi masyado. Nandiyan si Leloy eh.
Para kang Isabelo de los Reyes pala. You have so much energy, it can electrify the world, right? And
Well,
Leloy,
gusto ko makulong sa Spain.
With anarchists.
Barcelona.
With anarchists.
And thank you so much, Leloy. I'm sorry we got a little bit of your energy and time in the morning, but I hope we made it worth your time.
Of course. Tagal ko ng pangarap to. Okay.
God bless. Finally, we made it happen.
Good night. Good morning.
Good morning.
God bless.